The banquet hall glittered beneath thousands of crystal lights. Music drifted through the air while nobles laughed behind jeweled glasses. Alpha dukes discussed politics, wealthy merchants boasted about fortunes, and elegantly dressed omegas competed for attention with practiced smiles. Only one person didn't belong. Near the back of the room, dressed in a plain black servant's uniform, stood a young omega carrying a silver tray. His name was Lucien. He couldn't have been older than 22. Soft, silver blonde hair framed his gentle face, though most of it was hidden beneath a simple servant's cap. His pale blue eyes stayed lowered, careful never to meet anyone's gaze for too long. He moved quietly, almost invisibly, exactly the way servants were expected to. "Servant?" Lucien immediately turned. "Yes, my lord?" An alpha noble shoved an empty wine glass into his hands. "You've been standing there long enough. Refill it. Right away." Lucien bowed politely. As he walked away, another noble laughed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Has anyone noticed how strange that omega is?" "What do you mean?" "He never smiles." "Maybe no alpha wants him." The group burst into laughter. "I can't blame them. He's pretty enough, but he's so dull. I've seen abandoned puppies with more spirit." More laughter followed. Lucien heard every word. He simply kept walking, not because the insults didn't hurt, because he had learned long ago that silence hurt less than defending himself. The palace servants often whispered about him. Some said he had appeared one snowy winter morning carrying nothing except a small leather bag. Others claimed he had been abandoned by his parents. A few believed he had run away from an abusive alpha. Nobody knew the truth. Lucien never corrected any of them. He simply worked, day after day, year after year, never complaining, never asking for anything, never explaining who he really was. Tonight's banquet was different. The imperial palace had invited every influential family in the kingdom. There was only one reason so many powerful people had gathered. Someone important was returning, the crown's sword, the hero of the northern border, the youngest Grand Duke in history, the strongest alpha in the empire. People spoke his titles with admiration. Then the massive palace doors slowly opened. Silence swept across the ballroom. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. A tall alpha entered first, jet-black hair. Cold silver eyes, broad shoulders wrapped beneath an immaculate military uniform. His expression showed no warmth, no hesitation, no fear. Grand Duke Kyle Ashford had returned. Every omega in the room unconsciously held their breath. His pheromones were overwhelming, powerful, refined. The unmistakable scent of cedarwood after rain spread softly through the ballroom. Several young omegas immediately blushed. Others lowered their heads instinctively beneath the pressure of an apex alpha. Kale barely noticed them. He wasn't interested. Marriage had always been nothing more than another political obligation. His attention remained fixed ahead as he greeted the emperor with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty." The emperor smiled proudly. "Our kingdom owes you another victory. I merely fulfilled my duty." As always. The nobles applauded. Lucien quietly stepped behind a pillar with his tray, hoping to avoid the growing crowd surrounding the celebrated duke. That was when it happened. A sudden breeze drifted through the open balcony doors. Lucien froze. His heartbeat skipped. A scent, warm vanilla, fresh snow, white lilies after spring rain. Kale stopped walking, his head turned sharply. Those silver eyes scanned the ballroom with unusual intensity. His wolf stirred restlessly inside him. Mate. The single word echoed through every instinct he possessed. Impossible. He had never reacted to another omega this way. His pulse accelerated. The scent was faint, almost hidden, yet unmistakable. His mate was somewhere inside this room. Across, the ballroom. Lucien's fingers tightened around the silver tray until they trembled. No. Please. Not now. Not here. He slowly stepped backward. One step, then another, trying to disappear before the Alpha discovered him. He knew that scent. He had prayed for years never to encounter it, because once an Alpha recognized his fated mate, nothing in either of their lives would ever remain the same. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. Kale began walking straight toward him. Each step made Lucien's breathing more uneven. "Don't come closer, please." But the distance continued shrinking. 20 steps, 15, 10. Their eyes finally met. Time seemed to stop. Kyle had never seen someone so beautiful. The Omega wasn't dressed like the nobles surrounding him. His clothes were painfully ordinary. Yet his eyes, they carried a sadness so deep it felt older than either of them. For one brief second, the entire ballroom disappeared. Only the two of them remained. Lucien immediately lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry, Your Grace." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'll move." He tried to walk past. Kale instinctively reached for his wrist. The moment their skin touched, an invisible warmth rushed through both of them. Lucien gasped softly. Kale's wolf nearly howled. Mate, without question, without doubt. This quiet servant Omega was his destined mate. Neither of them noticed the dozens of eyes now watching from every corner of the ballroom, and among those watching, one pair of emerald green eyes narrowed with quiet hatred. Lord Adrian Vale, the Empire's most admired Omega. The man every noble expected Grand Duke Kale to marry. His elegant smile never faltered. But behind it, jealousy had already begun to bloom. And before the night was over, that jealousy would change all of their lives forever. For several long seconds, no one in the ballroom moved. Grand Duke Kale Ashford was still holding the wrist of an ordinary servant. The room fell so silent that even the musicians stopped playing. Every noble stared in disbelief. Lucien's heart pounded painfully against his ribs. He couldn't breathe, not because Kale's grip hurt, but because he recognized the unmistakable warmth flowing through their bond. His mate, after all these years, he had finally found him. Yet this wasn't how he had imagined it. Not in a crowded ballroom. Not while dressed as a servant. Not surrounded by people who would never accept someone like him. Lucien gently tried to pull his hand away. "Your Grace," his voice trembled. "I still have work to do." Kyle blinked as if waking from a dream. Only then did he realize everyone was watching. Slowly, he released Lucien's wrist. For the first time in years. The undefeated commander of the Imperial Army didn't know what to say. His wolf screamed inside him. Don't let him leave. Go after him. Protect him. Bring him home. Every instinct demanded the same thing. But Kale had spent his entire life controlling his instincts. He took one slow step back. Lucien bowed respectfully before hurrying away through the crowd. Only after he disappeared into the servants' corridor did Kale realize something strange. The mate bond. It felt incomplete, almost suppressed, as if someone had built invisible walls around it. His brows furrowed. How was that possible? The whispers began immediately. "Did you see that?" The Grand Duke touched a servant. "Why would he do that? I've never seen His Grace look at anyone like that. Could they?" No. An older Alpha laughed loudly. A servant could never be worthy of someone like Kale Ashford. The surrounding nobles quickly nodded. Exactly. If they're fated mates, then fate has a terrible sense of humor. More laughter followed. Kale heard every word. His expression remained unreadable, but something inside him didn't like hearing those insults. Not at all. On the opposite side of the ballroom, Adrian Vale watched everything. His smile remained flawless. Inside, he was furious. Impossible. Kale had barely acknowledged him despite years of carefully arranged meetings, yet one glance at a nameless servant, and the Alpha couldn't look away. Adrian slowly lifted his wine glass. So, he murmured quietly, that's the obstacle. His personal attendant stepped closer. My lord, find out everything about that servant. His name, where he sleeps, when he works, what he eats. I want every detail before sunrise. The attendant bowed immediately. Yes, my lord. Adrian's smile widened. If fate insists on giving Kale an unwanted omega, then fate can be corrected. Meanwhile, Lucien hid inside the palace kitchen. His breathing was still uneven. An elderly cook looked up from chopping vegetables. There you are. You vanished. Lucien forced a smile. I'm sorry. I wasn't feeling well. The old woman frowned with concern. You've gone pale. I'm all right. You always say that. She sighed before handing him a bowl of warm soup. Sit. You haven't eaten all day. Lucien quietly accepted it. The cooks adored him, unlike the nobles. They judged people by kindness instead of status. As Lucien slowly ate his soup, his fingers unconsciously brushed against a silver chain hidden beneath his shirt. Attached to it, a small pendant rested over his heart. Plain old, worn with age. No one in the palace had ever seen it. No one except Lucien knew what it truly represented. He closed his fingers around it. Not yet. Please, not yet. Back in the ballroom, the Emperor announced another toast. As many of you know, my nephew, Grand Duke Kale Ashford, has returned victorious. Applause filled the room once more. The Emperor smiled warmly. It is finally time for him to settle down. A ripple spread across the ballroom. Everyone understood what that meant. Marriage. The Emperor continued. Our kingdom needs an heir worthy of the Ashford bloodline. Several noble Omegas straightened immediately, including Adrian. The Emperor chuckled. I won't force him, but I do hope he finds someone soon. The nobles laughed politely. Kale remained silent. His eyes unconsciously drifted toward the servant's entrance. He wasn't thinking about noble families or political alliances. He was thinking about a quiet Omega with sad blue eyes. Why had Lucien looked so frightened? Why had he run away? Most Omegas dreamed of finding their fated Alpha. Yet Lucien had looked heartbroken, as if meeting him had been the worst thing that could happen. Hours later, the banquet finally ended. Servants worked together to clean the enormous ballroom. Lucien quietly gathered abandoned wine glasses while humming a melody under his breath. A lullaby. Soft, ancient, beautiful. He had sung it since childhood. Without realizing it, someone was listening. Kyle. He had returned after everyone else left, hoping to find the mysterious Omega again. Instead, he found himself standing silently outside the open doorway, listening. The melody stirred something deep inside him. It sounded familiar, almost royal. But that was impossible. How would a servant know an old lullaby that had disappeared from public ceremonies decades ago? Lucien finished collecting the glasses before turning around. His eyes widened. Your Grace. Kale stepped into the room. I wanted to speak with you. Lucien's grip tightened on the tray. About what? Our bond. The tray nearly slipped from his hands. I don't understand. You know exactly what I mean. Silence. Kale moved closer. I've fought wars. I've stood on battlefields surrounded by thousands of enemies. I've negotiated with kings. I've stared death in the face more times than I can count. His silver eyes softened. But today, I was more unsettled than I've ever been. Lucien couldn't look at him. Kale continued quietly. You're my mate. Lucien closed his eyes. I know. Those two words echoed through the empty ballroom. Cale's heartbeat quickened. You knew? Lucien nodded. I knew the moment I smelled your scent. Then why are you avoiding me? No answer. Have I done something wrong? Still silence. Kyle stepped even closer, close enough to notice the faint dark circles beneath Lucien's eyes, the tiny scars across his hands, the exhaustion hidden behind his gentle smile. You don't have to be afraid of me. Lucien almost laughed. Afraid? If only it were that simple. Slowly. He finally raised his eyes. Their gazes met again. This time, Cale saw tears gathering. Not tears of fear, not tears of happiness, tears of someone preparing to lose something precious. My Grace, Lucien whispered, I need you to promise me something, anything. If one day I disappear, please, don't come looking for me. Kyle stared at him in stunned silence. What? Before he could ask another question, a terrified scream echoed through the palace. Help! Someone help! Servants rushed into the hallway. A young maid came running, her face white with panic. The Emperor has collapsed. Everything changed in an instant. The palace exploded into chaos, and hidden among the confusion, one person smiled. Adrian, because while everyone rushed to save the Emperor, no one noticed the tiny empty vial slipping from beneath his sleeve onto the polished marble floor. The palace descended into chaos. The Emperor! Call the royal physicians! Clear the hallway! Nobles abandoned their conversations as guards rushed toward the imperial chambers. Servants scattered in every direction, carrying towels, water, and medical supplies. Lucien stood frozen. For a brief moment, something flashed across his face. Not fear, recognition, as though he had seen this before. Kyle noticed. Most people looked confused. Lucien looked concerned, deeply concerned, almost personally. Stay close to me, Kyle said instinctively. Lucien lowered his head. I shouldn't. You'll only get in the way if you stay alone. I said I shouldn't. Before Cale could question him, the captain of the royal guard hurried past. Your Grace! The physicians are requesting your presence immediately. Cale looked between the guard and Lucien. Duty 1. I'll come. He hesitated only a second before speaking quietly to Lucien. Don't leave the palace. Lucien gave a faint nod. I won't. As Cale disappeared down the corridor, Lucien whispered so softly that no one heard him. I'm sorry. The Emperor lay unconscious upon his bed. Royal physicians crowded around him. One checked his pulse, another examined his eyes. A third quietly shook his head. I don't understand. Neither do I. There are no visible injuries, no fever, no signs of heart failure. And yet, his condition keeps worsening. The room grew heavy with silence. Cale stepped inside. Report. The oldest physician bowed respectfully. We don't know what's causing this, Your Grace. You don't know? We've tried everything we can think of. Nothing is working. The Emperor's breathing grew weaker. Around the bed stood the royal family. The Empress struggled to hold back tears. Several princes argued in hushed voices. The youngest princess quietly cried into her mother's shoulder. No one noticed the servant standing just outside the open doorway. Lucien. He didn't step inside. He simply watched. His blue eyes lingered on the Emperor's pale face. Then, very quietly, he spoke. Has anyone checked his pulse on both wrists? The room fell silent. Several physicians turned toward the doorway. One frowned. And who are you? Lucien immediately lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was only. The physician scoffed. A servant wishes to lecture the Royal Medical Academy? Soft laughter spread through the room. Another physician folded his arms. This isn't the kitchen. Leave medicine to professionals. Lucien bowed immediately. You're right. I apologize. He turned to leave. Wait. Everyone looked toward Kale. The Grand Duke had not taken his eyes off Lucien. "What made you ask about both wrists?" Lucien hesitated. "It was only a story I heard as a child." "What story?" Lucien looked uncomfortable. "My grandmother used to say that some illnesses hide themselves. And she said the body sometimes tells different stories depending on which side you listen to." The physicians exchanged amused looks. One chuckled. "Children's tales." Another laughed. "We've spent 40 years studying medicine. I don't think a bedtime story will save His Majesty." Kyle remained silent. Something about Lucien's expression bothered him. He wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. He genuinely looked worried. The Grand Duke turned toward the chief physician. "Humor him." "My lord, check both wrists." The physician sighed. "As you wish." He reached for the Emperor's right wrist. Several seconds passed. Normal. Then he checked the left. His expression changed instantly. "That's impossible." Another physician hurried over. "What is it?" "The pulse. It's completely different." "What?" One after another, the physicians examined both wrists. Their confidence vanished. "How did we miss this?" "It changes everything. We've been treating the wrong symptoms." The oldest physician looked toward Lucien. For the first time, his eyes held respect instead of ridicule. "Young man, where exactly did you learn that?" Lucien bowed. "I truly don't know much. I was only fortunate." He didn't wait for more questions. He quietly slipped away before anyone could stop him. Outside, moonlight illuminated the palace gardens. Lucien walked alone beneath blooming white roses. The cool night air finally allowed him to breathe. "You always run away." He stopped. Kale stood several steps behind him. "I didn't want attention." "You saved the Emperor." "I didn't." "You gave the physicians the clue they needed." Lucien smiled faintly. They were the ones who saved him. Kale walked beside him. Neither spoke for several moments. The only sound came from the fountain nearby. Finally, Kale asked, "Who are you?" Lucien looked surprised. "A servant." "No." Kale shook his head. "You know things servants don't. You speak like a noble. You move like you've had formal etiquette training. You recognize that ancient lullaby. You understand medicine. And," he looked directly into Lucien's eyes, "you've never once looked impressed by my title." Lucien's smile grew almost sad. "Should I be?" Kale couldn't help smiling. "No, I suppose not." For the first time that evening, Lucien laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a small, genuine laugh. But to Kale, it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He realized then he wanted to hear it again, every day, for the rest of his life. From the balcony above, someone watched them, Adrian. His fingers tightened around the stone railing until his knuckles turned white. The sight of Kale smiling at another Omega felt like a knife twisting in his chest. "So," he whispered, "it has already begun." His attendant stepped beside him. "My lord?" Adrian never looked away from the garden. "If that servant remains here, I'll lose." He smiled. Calm, elegant, terrifying. "Then I simply have to make sure. Everyone believes he never belonged in this palace to begin with." Far below, Lucien looked up suddenly. For the briefest moment, he felt as though someone was watching him. But when he searched the balcony, no one was there. Only the wind, only the moon, and the quiet feeling that the peaceful life he had built for himself was about to come to an end. Morning sunlight spilled through the palace windows. For most servants, dawn meant another ordinary day. For Lucien, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. The whispers had already spread through every corridor. "That's him," the servant who caught the Grand Duke's attention. I heard His Grace smiled at him. Impossible. Then why did he spend so long talking to him in the garden? Lucien kept his head lowered as he carried a basket of fresh linens through the eastern hallway. He had become used to whispers years ago. But these were different. These weren't curious. They were cruel. As he turned the corner, 3 young noble Omegas deliberately stepped into his path. Their silk robes shimmered with expensive embroidery. One of them folded his arms. "So, you're the famous servant." Lucien bowed politely. "Excuse me." He tried to walk around them. A polished shoe blocked his way. "We weren't finished." Lucien stopped. "I'm sorry if I've offended you." The tallest Omega laughed. "You think this is about us?" He stepped closer. "You've offended someone much more important." Lucien remained silent. Another Omega looked him up and down with obvious disgust. "I don't understand what His Grace could possibly see in you. You don't even smell like a proper Omega. You dress like a beggar. You barely speak." And yet, he leaned closer. "You still dared to stand beside Grand Duke Ashford." Lucien answered softly. "I never intended to. That only made them laugh harder." One of them snatched the basket from Lucien's hands. White linens scattered across the marble floor. Oh dear. What a terrible accident. The 3 Omegas walked away, still laughing. Lucien quietly knelt. One by one, he folded every sheet again. His hands worked carefully, refusing to rush, despite the sting behind his eyes. "You should have let me help." Lucien froze. Cale. The Grand Duke had somehow appeared without making a sound. He crouched beside Lucien. Before Lucien could protest, Cale picked up one of the fallen sheets. "Your Grace." Lucien reached toward him. "You don't have to." "I know." Kyle calmly folded another cloth. "But I want to." Several passing servants stopped in complete disbelief. An Apex Alpha, a Grand Duke, helping a servant fold laundry. It made no sense. Lucien looked around nervously. "People are staring." "I don't care." "But your reputation—" "My reputation survived battlefields." Cale looked at him with a small smile. "I think it can survive a few bed sheets." For the first time that morning, Lucien smiled. It was tiny, barely noticeable. Yet Cale immediately relaxed. "There it is." Lucien blinked. "What?" "Your smile. It suits you much better than sadness." The word struck Lucien harder than Cale could possibly know. No one had said something so gentle to him in years. Perhaps no one ever had. From across the hallway, Adrian watched everything. His perfect smile never faltered. Inside, jealousy burned hotter than ever. Every conversation, every glance, every smile. Cale gave them all to Lucien, things Adrian had spent years trying to earn. Enough. He turned to his attendant. "Is everything prepared?" The attendant nodded. "Yes, my lord." "Good." Adrian's emerald eyes gleamed. "Then let's begin." That afternoon, the palace erupted once again. The Empress's necklace is missing. Guards sealed every entrance. No one was allowed to leave. The Imperial Chamberlain addressed everyone gathered in the central hall. "The Emerald Phoenix necklace is a national treasure, until it is recovered. Every servant and noble present in the palace will be searched." Murmurs spread immediately. Lucien's stomach tightened, not because he had done anything wrong, but because something about the situation felt wrong. The searches began. One by one, servants emptied their pockets. Nothing. Then it was Lucien's turn. A palace guard bowed politely. "My apologies." Lucien nodded. "I understand." He emptied his apron pockets. A handkerchief, a small notebook, a piece of string. Nothing unusual. Then, the guard reached into the inner pocket of Lucien's coat. His expression changed. "My lord?" The guard slowly withdrew something wrapped in white cloth. When the cloth unfolded, the entire hall gasped. The Emerald Phoenix necklace sparkled beneath the chandeliers. Silence. Complete silence. Every pair of eyes turned toward Lucien. The Chamberlain's face hardened. "Explain yourself." Lucien stared at the necklace in disbelief. I, I've never seen it before. A noble scoffed. It was found in your pocket. I don't know how. Another voice rang out. Liar. Soon others joined in. A thief. I knew there was something suspicious about him. No servant could resist something so valuable. Lucien shook his head desperately. I didn't steal it. I swear. But every word seemed to make things worse. A guard stepped forward. By order of the palace, you are under arrest. Cold iron shackles closed around Lucien's wrists. He didn't resist. He simply looked down, not because he had given up, because he knew exactly how this looked. Across the hall, Adrian lowered his gaze to hide the satisfaction in his eyes. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. If Lucien were branded a thief, Kyle would have no choice but to abandon him. Even a fated mate could not survive such disgrace, or so Adrian believed. Enough. One word. Quiet, firm. Every conversation stopped. Kyle stepped forward. His silver eyes never left Lucien. Remove the shackles. The chamberlain frowned. Your Grace, the evidence, I said. Kale's voice became colder. Remove them. My lord, the necklace was literally found in his possession. Kale finally turned toward the officials. I've commanded soldiers for nearly a decade. I've investigated betrayal. I've uncovered spies. And one lesson has never failed me. He looked back at Lucien. The guilty usually defend themselves. They shout. They accuse. They panic. His gaze softened. This Omega looks more heartbroken that no one believes him. Kale stepped until he stood directly in front of Lucien. Look at me. Slowly. Lucien raised tear-filled eyes. Only one question came. Did you steal it? The entire hall waited. Lucien's voice barely rose above a whisper. No. Not another explanation. Not another excuse. Just one honest word. Kale believed him instantly, without hesitation, without proof, without logic. He turned toward the guards. Find the real thief! Shock swept through the room. Even Lucien stared at him. You, Lucien whispered. You believe me? Kyle answered without taking his eyes off him. I believe you. 4 simple words to everyone else. They sounded insignificant. To Lucien. They shattered the walls around his heart. For the first time since arriving at the palace years ago. Someone had chosen to trust him, not because of his status, not because of his usefulness, simply because they believed in him. Lucien had promised himself he would never cry again, but as tears silently rolled down his cheeks, he realized that promise had just become impossible to keep. A single tear slipped down Lucien's cheek. He wiped it away before anyone else could notice. But Kale had already seen it. For reasons he couldn't explain, seeing Lucien cry hurt far more than any wound he'd received on the battlefield. The Grand Duke turned toward the captain of the Royal Guard. Seal every exit. The captain blinked. They're already sealed, Your Grace. Good. Kale's silver eyes swept across the crowd. If Lucien didn't steal the necklace, then the real thief is still inside this palace. An uneasy silence settled over the hall. For the first time, the nobles stopped looking only at Lucien. They began looking at each other. The Imperial Chamberlain cleared his throat. Your Grace, with all due respect, the necklace was found in his coat. It doesn't simply appear there. No, Kyle replied calmly. It doesn't. His gaze never wavered, so someone put it there. Several nobles exchanged nervous glances. One elderly duke stepped forward. You're allowing your emotions to cloud your judgment. Kyle met the duke's eyes. My judgment has kept this kingdom safe for 10 years. I trust it. No one argued after that. The guards escorted everyone into the grand reception hall while the investigation began. Lucien quietly stood near one of the windows. He wished he could disappear. Every whisper still reached his ears. He must have charmed the Grand Duke. Otherwise, why would his grace defend a servant? Perhaps they're already bonded. No. If they were, the palace would know. Lucien closed his eyes. If only they knew how impossible that was. Across the room, the Empress watched him in silence. She had hardly spoken all morning, yet something about the quiet Omega unsettled her. Not in a frightening way, in a familiar one, his posture, the way he bowed, the elegance with which he held a teacup earlier that morning. Those weren't habits servants learned. Those were habits drilled into children from noble families before they could even read. She found herself staring without realizing it. "Your Majesty?" One of her ladies-in-waiting spoke softly. The Empress blinked. "Hmm? You've been watching that servant for several minutes. Have I?" The lady smiled politely. "It seems so." The Empress looked toward Lucien once more. "He reminds me of someone." "Who?" "I don't know." That answer surprised even herself. Several hours passed. The guards searched every corridor, every guest room, every servant's quarters. Nothing. Not a single clue. Kale frowned. Someone had planned this carefully, too carefully. Whoever framed Lucien understood palace routines. They knew where servants changed uniforms. They knew when Lucien would be alone, and they knew exactly how to manipulate the crowd. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was calculated. Meanwhile, Lucien quietly returned to the servants' wing. He wanted nothing more than to finish his duties and be alone. As he entered the laundry room, an elderly maid smiled warmly. "There you are." Lucien forced a smile. "I worried you were angry." The old woman looked offended. "At you?" She walked over and gently brushed invisible dust from his shoulder. "Child, I've watched you work for 5 years. You always return lost coins. You feed stray cats. You spend your own wages buying medicine for sick servants." She smiled sadly. "If someone says you're a thief, then they don't know you at all." Lucien's lips trembled. "You. You really believe me?" The elderly maid chuckled. "I believed you before His Grace did." More servants slowly entered the room, one by one. They nodded. A young kitchen boy spoke first. "You repaired my shoes last winter." Another servant smiled. "You stayed awake all night when my sister was sick." A gardener laughed quietly. "You planted flowers for the palace children because they said the courtyard looked lonely." Soon, nearly every servant in the room was smiling at Lucien. No speeches. No dramatic declarations, just quiet faith. Lucien had spent years believing he was invisible. He suddenly realized he had never been alone. Late that evening, Kale found him sitting in the palace greenhouse. The room glowed beneath hundreds of hanging lanterns. White lilies bloomed beside tiny streams that wound through polished stone paths. Lucien sat on a wooden bench, gently watering a flower that had begun to wilt. "You come here often?" Lucien looked up. "It helps me think." Kyle sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Finally, Kyle spoke. "When I was 15, Lucien turned toward him. "My father died." Lucien's expression softened. "I'm sorry." Kyle gave a faint smile. "Everyone told me to stop crying. They said an alpha couldn't afford tears. So, I learned to hide everything." Lucien listened quietly. "The first battle I fought. I lost friends. I wanted to mourn them, but everyone called me a hero. They celebrated. No one asked how I was." Kale looked down at his hands. "I think. I forgot how to be honest." Lucien spoke so softly, it was almost carried away by the breeze. "You don't have to pretend with me." Kyle looked at him. Those simple words struck deeper than any sword, for the first time in years. He felt understood, not admired, Not respected, understood. A sudden gust of wind swept through the greenhouse. Lucien instinctively reached for the silver pendant hidden beneath his shirt. The chain had slipped into view. Kyle noticed. That's beautiful. Lucien quickly tucked it back beneath his clothes. It's old. May I see it? A flicker of panic crossed Lucien's face. I'm sorry. I can't. Kale immediately nodded. I won't ask again. Lucien looked relieved, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that one day, Kale would see the pendant, and when he did, everything would change, elsewhere in the palace. Adrian paced inside his chambers. His attendant stood nervously by the door. My lord. The plan failed. No. Adrian stopped walking. It merely slowed. He stared out the window at the moonlit gardens. As long as Lucien remains beside Kyle, I cannot win. His expression slowly hardened. So I need something stronger than rumors. He smiled, coldly. I need the entire kingdom to reject him. That same night. Far beyond the capital, a black carriage raced through the northern mountains. Its horses were exhausted. Inside sat an elderly man dressed in faded royal blue. His trembling hands clutched an ancient parchment bearing the imperial seal. We're almost there, the driver called. The old man looked toward the distant lights of the capital. His eyes filled with tears. Please, let me not be too late. He opened a small velvet box resting on his lap. Inside lay the other half of an intricately carved silver pendant, identical to the one hidden beneath Lucien's shirt. The old man closed the box with shaking fingers. Your Highness, I've finally found you. The first rays of dawn painted the palace in shades of gold. Most of its residents slept peacefully after the previous day's chaos. Lucien did not. He had spent the entire night sitting beside the greenhouse fountain, watching the water ripple, thinking. If fate had truly reunited him with his mate, why did it feel like fate was preparing to take everything away? He quietly closed his eyes. Mother, he whispered into the morning air. I don't know what to do anymore. A knock echoed against the servants' quarters. 3 palace guards stood outside. Lucien immediately rose to his feet. Is something wrong? The captain of the guard bowed. His Grace requests your presence. Lucien blinked. Now? Immediately. His stomach tightened. Had they found new evidence? Had Kale changed his mind? Without another word, Lucien followed them through the palace. Every servant they passed offered him encouraging smiles. None of them believed he was guilty anymore. That simple kindness warmed his heart. The training grounds were nearly empty. Only one figure stood in the center. Kyle. His black training clothes were damp with sweat. A wooden practice sword rested over his shoulder. You came, Lucien bowed. You asked to see me. Kyle nodded. I did. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Kyle held out another wooden sword. Can you fence? Lucien looked genuinely surprised. Me? I've never seen you hold a weapon. So? I was curious. Lucien hesitated. I don't think that's appropriate. Kale smiled faintly. No one's here. Humor me. After several seconds, Lucien accepted the sword. His fingers wrapped naturally around the handle. Too naturally. Kale noticed immediately. Most people gripped a sword with uncertainty. Lucien held it like someone who had been taught correctly, years ago. Whenever you're ready. Lucien sighed softly. I'm warning you, I'm very rusty. Kyle chuckled. I'll survive. They bowed to each other. Then, Lucien moved. Kale's eyes widened. Fast, elegant, perfect. The wooden swords met with a sharp crack. Lucien stepped lightly across the stone, his movements graceful enough to resemble a dance. Kale blocked, countered, attacked again. Lucien deflected each strike with astonishing precision. Not once did he attempt to overpower Kale. Instead, he redirected every attack, using almost no strength at all. 5 minutes later, Kale lowered his sword. Breathing hard, Lucien immediately stepped back and bowed. "I'm sorry," Cale laughed. "For what?" I almost forgot myself. The Grand Duke couldn't stop smiling. "Forgot yourself? You nearly disarmed me." Lucien looked horrified. "I did? You absolutely did." For the first time in years, Cale laughed from the heart, a genuine laugh, warm, unrestrained. The sound echoed across the empty training grounds. Lucien couldn't help smiling, too. It was impossible not to. Neither of them noticed someone watching from the palace balcony. The Empress. She had come to enjoy the morning air. Instead, she found herself staring at the quiet servant. Her gaze narrowed. That stance, that footwork, that bow. No, it couldn't be. Only children educated inside the royal palace learned that ceremonial fencing style. The lessons had been discontinued almost 20 years earlier. Only one generation had ever mastered them. The royal heirs. The color slowly drained from her face. "Impossible," she whispered. Later that morning, a dust-covered carriage stopped before the palace gates. The guards crossed their spears. "Halt!" An elderly man slowly climbed down. His blue cloak had faded with age. His silver hair was tied neatly behind his head despite the long journey. "I request an audience with their majesties. State your name." The old man bowed respectfully. "My name is Elias. I served the royal family many years ago." The guards exchanged confused looks. One frowned. "The emperor isn't receiving visitors." "I understand." Elias reached inside his cloak. For one terrifying second, the guards reached for their swords. Instead, he carefully produced a small golden ring engraved with the imperial crest. The oldest guard's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "It was given to me." "By the late queen." Silence. The guards looked at one another. One hurried inside the palace. "Wait here." Elias nodded. "I've already waited 18 years. I can wait a little longer." Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his private chambers, sipping tea. His attendant entered in a panic. "My lord!" Adrian calmly placed the teacup on its saucer. "What is it?" "A former royal servant has arrived." "So?" "He claims to possess something belonging to the late queen." Adrian's expression remained perfectly composed. Only his fingers tightened around the porcelain cup. "What is his name?" "Elias." For the first time. A flicker of fear crossed Adrian's eyes. Elias. He knew that name. Everyone involved in the disappearance 18 years ago knew that name. "I thought," he whispered, "he was dead." His attendant looked confused. "My lord?" Adrian stood abruptly. "No one is to let that old man speak with the emperor." "But no excuses." His voice was colder than ice. "If he reaches the royal family, everything we've built will collapse." The attendant hurried away. Adrian remained alone. His reflection stared back at him from the window. For the first time since meeting Lucien, he wasn't angry. He was afraid, deeply afraid. Because if Elias had truly returned, then the truth buried for nearly 2 decades was about to surface. That afternoon, Lucien carried fresh flowers toward the royal chapel. It had always been his favorite place, quiet, peaceful, a sanctuary from the endless whispers of the palace. He carefully arranged white lilies before the memorial of the late queen. Then he knelt. "I hope," he murmured softly, "that wherever you are, you're happy." A gentle voice answered behind him. I believe she would be. Lucien turned. An elderly man stood in the doorway, travel-worn, kind eyes, a faded blue cloak, the moment their gazes met. The flowers slipped from Lucien's hands. The old man's lips trembled, his eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, neither of them could speak. Finally, The old man took one hesitant step forward. His voice broke into a whisper. "Your Highness?" Lucien's face turned completely pale. "No," he breathed. How did you find me?" Lucien felt as though the world had stopped turning. The chapel suddenly seemed far too quiet. The white lilies at his feet blurred as his vision filled with tears. The elderly man stood frozen in the doorway, his weathered hands trembling. "Your Highness." The words echoed through the empty chapel. Lucien slowly shook his head. "No." His voice barely escaped his lips. "You shouldn't call me that anymore." The old man took another hesitant step. "I searched for you for 18 years. Lucien closed his eyes. "Elias." The old servant's knees nearly gave out. "You remember me?" "How could I forget?" Lucien smiled sadly through his tears. "You used to sneak honey cakes into my lessons whenever Mother wasn't looking." A broken laugh escaped Elias. "And you always pretended not to know. You thought you were clever." "I was 8. "You were impossible. For just a heartbeat." Neither of them saw a servant and an old traveler. They saw the child who had once laughed through palace gardens, and the man who had watched him grow. Then reality returned. Lucien's smile disappeared. "You have to leave." Elias stared at him. "What? You cannot stay here." "But I've finally found you." "I know." "Then why are you telling me to leave?" Lucien looked toward the stained glass windows. Morning light spilled across the marble floor. "I didn't disappear by accident. I chose this life." Elias's eyes widened. "No, you were taken." Lucien remained silent. "You were only 4 years old. You couldn't possibly choose." "I remember." Elias stopped speaking. Lucien slowly opened his eyes. "They thought I was too young. They believed I wouldn't remember." His fingers unconsciously reached for the silver pendant beneath his shirt. "But I remember everything." 18 years earlier. Rain had fallen over the capital. A little boy laughed as he chased butterflies through the royal gardens. His silver blonde hair danced in the wind. 2 palace guards followed several steps behind. "Your Highness!" "Slow down!" The child only laughed louder. "You have to catch me first." Hidden behind the rose bushes. Someone watched, a pair of cold eyes, waiting, patient. The memory shattered. Lucien inhaled sharply. His hands trembled. "I remember Mother's voice. I remember Father's smile. I remember the gardens. I remember." His voice cracked. "The fire." Elias lowered his head. For 18 years, he had prayed Lucien remembered nothing. Children who carried painful memories often carried endless nightmares with them. "I remember someone carrying me away. I remember crying because I wanted to go back. I remember asking where my parents were." Lucien smiled bitterly. No one answered. Silence settled between them. Finally, Elias whispered, "They searched every kingdom. They crossed every sea. The emperor never stopped looking for you." Lucien laughed quietly, a heartbreaking sound. "Then why didn't they find me?" Elias couldn't answer. Because he had asked himself the same question every day for 18 years. Lucien walked toward the altar. "I built a new life. I'm just a servant now." "No." Elias stepped forward. "You are the crown prince." "I was." "You still are." Lucien shook his head. "I clean floors. I serve tea. I polish armor. And—" his smile became painfully gentle. "I'm happy doing it." Elias looked at him in disbelief. "Happy? I don't have to wonder whether people like me because of a title. I don't have to fear court politics. I don't have to smile when I want to cry." He looked around the quiet chapel. "For the first time in my life, I've been allowed to simply be Lucien." Tears rolled down Elias's cheeks. "You've lived all these years believing you had nothing." Lucien looked down. "I didn't. You had an entire family searching for you. Those words struck Lucien like lightning. He froze. What? The Emperor, the Empress, the royal household. They never forgot you. The Queen, Elias struggled to continue, died believing you were still alive. Lucien's breathing became uneven. No. Every birthday. The Emperor ordered your favorite honey cake to be placed beside your empty chair. Lucien covered his mouth. He refused to let anyone sit there. More tears escaped Elias. He said, "If my grandson comes home tomorrow, he'll need somewhere to sit." Lucien's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the chapel steps. For 18 years, he had believed he'd been abandoned, thrown away, forgotten. Now, everything he believed about his past was crumbling. Outside the chapel, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Kale. He had been searching the palace ever since one of the servants mentioned Lucien hadn't returned from delivering flowers. As he approached the chapel doors, he heard voices. "Your Highness." Kale stopped walking. His heartbeat quickened. Surely, he had misheard. Inside. Lucien whispered through tears, "I can't go back. You must. They deserve better. They deserve you." Kale's hand slowly reached the chapel door. It remained slightly open, through the narrow gap. He could see Lucien kneeling before an elderly stranger. He couldn't see their faces clearly, only hear fragments. The throne. The kingdom. Your birthright. Kyle frowned. None of it made sense. Birthright? Throne? Your Highness? Who exactly? Was the quiet Omega he had fallen in love with? Before he could step inside, another pair of eyes watched from the opposite end of the corridor. Adrian. He had followed Elias to the chapel, and unlike Kale, he heard every single word. His face drained of color. "It can't be," he whispered. "He survived." For the first time in years, the always composed Adrian stumbled backward, because he finally understood why Lucien had always felt different, why he carried himself with effortless grace, why the Empress couldn't stop staring at him, why the Grand Duke's instincts trusted him so completely. The quiet servant wasn't merely a noble. He was the rightful crown prince, and if the royal family learned the truth, everything Adrian had spent years scheming for would disappear overnight. He clenched his fists until they bled. His voice was barely audible. Then, "I'll make sure he never reaches them." Adrian didn't hesitate. The moment he slipped away from the chapel corridor, he summoned his most trusted attendant. "Send word." The young man bowed immediately. "To whom, my lord?" Adrian's emerald eyes were colder than the winter sea. "To everyone who still remembers 18 years ago." The attendant's expression paled. "My lord, after all this time, if Lucien reaches the Emperor before we act." Adrian's voice hardened. "There will be no future left for any of us." The attendant swallowed. "I understand." He hurried away without another word. Adrian remained alone in the corridor. For years, he had believed the greatest obstacle to becoming Kale's mate was another Omega. Now he understood the truth. His greatest obstacle was a prince. Inside the chapel, silence lingered. Lucien finally found the strength to stand. He wiped his tears and offered Elias a small, tired smile. "You always worried too much." Elias gave a weak laugh. "And you always smiled when your heart was breaking." Lucien looked away. "I learned from the best." The old man shook his head. "No, you learned because no child should have had to survive what you survived." Those words settled heavily between them. After a long pause, Lucien spoke again. "If I return, what happens to the people here?" Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" "The servants, the cooks, the gardeners. They're my family now. I can't simply disappear without saying goodbye." Elias watched him quietly, even after discovering he had been the kingdom's missing prince all along. Lucien's first concern wasn't the throne. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't power. It was the people who had shown him kindness when he had nothing. The old man smiled through his tears. Your mother used to do the same. Lucien blinked. Whenever someone praised her kindness, Elias chuckled softly. She'd say, "A crown is only as heavy as the people it protects." Lucien lowered his head. I barely remember her face. You have her heart. Outside the chapel, Kyle remained hidden behind one of the stone pillars. He knew he should leave. He knew he shouldn't listen. Yet his feet refused to move. Every instinct urged him to protect Lucien. But how could he protect someone whose life he didn't even understand? He closed his eyes. His wolf stirred uneasily, not with jealousy, not with anger, with fear. Fear that Lucien might leave. Fear that he might lose him before truly knowing him. The chapel doors slowly opened. Lucien stepped outside first. His eyes were still red. He stopped the moment he saw Kale. Neither of them spoke. Lucien understood immediately. Kale had heard something. Maybe not everything, but enough. Kale approached slowly. Are you all right? Lucien nodded automatically. I'm fine. You've been crying. I'll be all right. Kale looked at him for several seconds. Then, very gently, he reached into his pocket and unfolded a clean white handkerchief. You missed one. Lucien looked confused. Kale carefully brushed away a tear still resting beneath Lucien's eye. The touch was impossibly gentle, as though Lucien might shatter if he wasn't careful. Lucien's breathing caught. No one had treated him with such tenderness in years. Perhaps ever. Kale smiled softly. There. Lucien couldn't stop looking at him. You really don't ask many questions. I have hundreds. Then, why don't you ask them? Kale's answer came without hesitation. Because you'll tell me when you're ready. Lucien felt something inside him crack. Not painfully, warmly, like ice melting beneath the first sunlight of spring. He whispered, You make trusting you very difficult. Kyle raised an eyebrow. I would have thought I make it easy. Lucien laughed quietly. Exactly. At that very moment, the palace bells rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Every servant froze, every noble turned toward the central tower. The bells only rang like that for matters concerning the royal family. A palace herald hurried across the courtyard. His Majesty has awakened. Relief spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants embraced one another. The royal physicians smiled for the first time in days. The emperor had survived. Lucien quietly closed his eyes in gratitude. I'm glad. Kale noticed the genuine relief in his voice. It wasn't the relief of a loyal servant. It sounded personal. An hour later, the emperor insisted on holding a private audience despite the physician's objections. Present in the room were only the empress, Kyle, the chief physician, and a handful of senior advisors. The emperor looked weaker than usual, but his eyes remained sharp. I've been told, he began, that a young servant helped save my life. The chief physician bowed. That is correct, Your Majesty. What is his name? Lucien. The emperor repeated it quietly. Lucien. Something flickered in his expression, an emotion he couldn't quite place. The empress spoke next. My dear, I would like to meet him. Kyle's heart skipped. The emperor nodded. So would I. The order was given immediately. Bring the servant Lucien to the imperial audience chamber. A royal messenger bowed and hurried away. Meanwhile, Lucien stood alone in the greenhouse once again. He had come there whenever life became too overwhelming. He knelt beside a bed of white lilies. I don't know what to do. His voice was almost a prayer. If I tell them the truth, I lose the life I've built, If I hide it, I betray the family that never stopped searching. His fingers wrapped around the silver pendant beneath his shirt. I wish, he whispered, someone would tell me which choice hurts less. Footsteps approached behind him. Lucien assumed it was Kale. Without turning, he smiled faintly. I thought you'd find me here. No answer came. Instead, a cold voice spoke. You always did like flowers. Lucien's smile vanished. He turned slowly. Standing, at the entrance to the greenhouse were three strangers dressed in black travel cloaks. Their faces were unfamiliar, but the oldest among them looked at Lucien with unmistakable recognition. His scarred lips curved into a cruel smile. So, he said quietly, the little prince is all grown up. Lucien's face turned completely white. The pendant slipped from his trembling fingers, because he remembered that voice. He remembered those eyes, and after 18 years, he finally recognized one of the people who had stolen his childhood. Adrien didn't hesitate. The moment he slipped away from the chapel corridor, he summoned his most trusted attendant. Send word. The young man bowed immediately. To whom, my lord? Adrien's emerald eyes were colder than the winter sea. To everyone who still remembers 18 years ago, the attendant's expression paled. My lord, after all this time? If Lucien reaches the Emperor before we act. Adrien's voice hardened. There will be no future left for any of us. The attendant swallowed. I understand. He hurried away without another word. Adrien remained alone in the corridor. For years, he had believed the greatest obstacle to becoming Kale's mate was another Omega. Now he understood the truth. His greatest obstacle was a prince. Inside the chapel, silence lingered. Lucien finally found the strength to stand. He wiped his tears and offered Elias a small, tired smile. You always worried too much. Elias gave a weak laugh. And you always smiled when your heart was breaking. Lucien looked away. I learned from the best. The old man shook his head. No, you learned because no child should have had to survive what you survived. Those words settled heavily between them. After a long pause, Lucien spoke again. If I return, what happens to the people here? Elias frowned. What do you mean? The servants. The cooks. The gardeners. They're my family now? I can't simply disappear without saying goodbye. Elias watched him quietly. Even after discovering he had been the kingdom's missing prince all along. Lucien's first concern wasn't the throne. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't power. It was the people who had shown him kindness when he had nothing. The old man smiled through his tears. Your mother used to do the same. Lucien blinked. Whenever someone praised her kindness, Elias chuckled softly. She'd say, a crown is only as heavy as the people it protects. Lucien lowered his head. I barely remember her face. You have her heart. Outside the chapel, Kyle remained hidden behind one of the stone pillars. He knew he should leave. He knew he shouldn't listen. Yet his feet refused to move. Every instinct urged him to protect Lucien, but how could he protect someone whose life he didn't even understand? He closed his eyes. His wolf stirred uneasily, not with jealousy, not with anger, with fear. Fear that Lucien might leave, fear that he might lose him before truly knowing him. The chapel doors slowly opened. Lucien stepped outside first. His eyes were still red. He stopped the moment he saw Kale. Neither of them spoke. Lucien understood immediately. Kale had heard something, maybe not everything, but enough. Kale approached slowly. Are you all right? Lucien nodded automatically. I'm fine. You've been crying. I'll be all right. Kale looked at him for several seconds. Then, very gently, he reached into his pocket and unfolded a clean white handkerchief. You missed one. Lucien looked confused. Kale carefully brushed away a tear still resting beneath Lucien's eye. The touch was impossibly gentle, as though Lucien might shatter if he wasn't careful. Lucien's breathing caught. No one had treated him with such tenderness in years. Perhaps ever. Cale smiled softly. There. Lucien couldn't stop looking at him. You really don't ask many questions. I have hundreds. Then, why don't you ask them? Cale's answer came without hesitation. Because you'll tell me when you're ready. Lucien felt something inside him crack. Not painfully, warmly, like ice melting beneath the first sunlight of spring. He whispered, You make trusting you very difficult. Cale raised an eyebrow. I would have thought I make it easy. Lucien laughed quietly. Exactly. At that very moment, the palace bells rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Every servant froze. Every noble turned toward the central tower. The bells only rang like that for matters concerning the royal family. A palace herald hurried across the courtyard. His Majesty has awakened! Relief spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants embraced one another. The royal physicians smiled for the first time in days. The emperor had survived. Lucien quietly closed his eyes in gratitude. I'm glad. Kyle noticed the genuine relief in his voice. It wasn't the relief of a loyal servant. It sounded personal. An hour later, the emperor insisted on holding a private audience despite the physician's objections. Present in the room were only the empress, Kyle, the chief physician, and a handful of senior advisors. The emperor looked weaker than usual, but his eyes remained sharp. I've been told, he began, that a young servant helped save my life. The chief physician bowed. That is correct, Your Majesty. What is his name? Lucien. The emperor repeated it quietly. Lucien. Something flickered in his expression, an emotion he couldn't quite place. The empress spoke next. My dear, I would like to meet him. Kyle's heart skipped. The emperor nodded. So would I. The order was given immediately. Bring the servant Lucien to the imperial audience chamber. A royal messenger bowed and hurried away. Meanwhile, Lucien stood alone in the greenhouse once again. He had come there whenever life became too overwhelming. He knelt beside a bed of white lilies. I don't know what to do. His voice was almost a prayer. If I tell them the truth, I lose the life I've built. If I hide it, I betray the family that never stopped searching. His fingers wrapped around the silver pendant beneath his shirt. I wish, he whispered, someone would tell me which choice hurts less. Footsteps approached behind him. Lucien assumed it was Kyle. Without turning, he smiled faintly. I thought you'd find me here. No answer came. Instead, a cold voice spoke. You always did like flowers. Lucien's smile vanished. He turned slowly. Standing. At the entrance to the greenhouse were 3 strangers dressed in black travel cloaks. Their faces were unfamiliar. But the oldest among them looked at Lucien with unmistakable recognition. His scarred lips curved into a cruel smile. So, he said quietly, the little prince is all grown up. Lucien's face turned completely white. The pendant slipped from his trembling fingers because he remembered that voice. He remembered those eyes. And after 18 years, he finally recognized one of the people who had stolen his childhood.